Martin, come on. Hi, thanks for joining us for That Larimer County Show. My name's Deni LaRue, Larimer County Community Information Manager.
And I'm Neil Gluckman, Assistant County Manager of Larimer County, and we have a very special show today.
That's right, the budget show.
That's right, and because it's a budget show, we have the Budget Director, Bob Keister.
Hi.
And we also have the County Manager, Frank Lancaster.
Hi.
Well, Frank, let's get started for the citizens out there with just kind of an overview. What is the proposed Larimer County budget this year, and how does that differ from last year?
Well, the budget this year is actually going down. It's the first time it has in, actually, as long as I can remember. And it's going to be about a 2% drop from what we adopted last year. And we're going from about $295 million down to $290 million as the budget. There's a lot of places of reason for that, but mostly it's because of drop in revenues from a lot of sources. And the economy is just really tight everywhere, and everybody's having to tighten up. So we are looking at about a 2% decrease over what we had budgeted for last year.
Okay.
So we're talking about the 2010 budget. What are some of the highlights, some of the differences between 2010 and 2009? What are some of the highlights that you could point out about this year's budget or next year's budget?
Well, there's nothing too exciting about it because it is a drop in the budget. A few of the things that are there is that we are doing a few enhancements to putting some money into things that we see as positive returns on investment, things that we can invest some money in and get some value out of them. So we're looking at putting some money into things like a kiosk system for a video visitation of the jail that can save us some money and possibly even bring in some revenue. We're looking at some software improvements that can save on efficiencies and save some costs there. So we're investing there. We're also, unfortunately, having to put a lot more money diverted from the general fund into operating in the jail. A lot of the new part of the jail is operated through a sales tax, and sales taxes for the county, just like everybody else, are way down. And that's hurting us. And so we're having to divert a lot more money into operations of the jail and the detention center. We're doing a lot of alternatives to try and keep those costs down, but we still have to operate the facility and make up that difference. So that's a big change for next year. We're also putting money into savings for this year. We have to do that because our revenues are adjusted every other year as the property tax assessments are done. So in those off years, we set money aside and save for the future, and we're saving about $1.8 million into savings for future needs because we think it's going to be tight in the future quite a bit, and we want to have some money set aside to kind of soften those costs and soften those impacts of as things get tight in the future.
They talk about the being stable as the new up, and it sounds a little bit like that. Being able to put some money into reserves is a kind of a positive thing.
It really is. We've always been conservative in our budgeting, and I think because of that, we're not hit with some huge costs and huge cuts like some of our sister counties are throughout the state. They're getting hit really hard, but I think we're in pretty good shape. We are going to see some cutbacks though, and because we're so staff intensive, it's going to have to come into some way of staffing. We're looking at cutting between 27 and 28 positions, but we're able to do those from attrition, from not filling vacancies, and I don't think we're going to have to actually lay anybody off and take a job away from them.
What about compensation? How large an increase our county employees are going to receive next year?
We base our compensation on doing the 50th percentile, so we're kind of in the middle. We don't want to pay more than the average or more than the other entities or less. We do the 50th percentile, and it's not moving. So for next year, we're not increasing salaries at all for any of the county employees. It's staying the same as it was in 2009. The other thing that came out real good for us is that our benefits aren't going up. We did some changing our benefits carrier for particularly health insurance. Everybody's health insurance is a big topic these days. And we're able to not increase our health insurance at all for our employees. And that helps, particularly people that are tight, single parents that are trying to raise kids. It's really tough when your salary doesn't go up, but your benefits or your cost of health insurance increases, in some cases double digits. So we're looking at flat on compensation, but also flat on the cost of benefits as well for this year.
Okay. And we've seen some days closed for the building department, for example. We're looking at some furloughs at solid waste, voluntary furloughs out there to hold the budget down, as I understand it.
Actually, the solid waste ones are done.
They're done.
We
Okay.
did some furloughs in there earlier in the year, and the revenues are back up, and they've made some adjustments. So we're not furloughing out at the solid waste department, which is the landfill.
Okay.
We are, however, still and into the future looking at the building department being closed 1 day a week on Mondays, because the building is just not happening, the revenues aren't coming in. The building department is what we call an enterprise fund. It operates like a business, which means it operates on the revenues it brings in. It doesn't get tax dollars. So when you've got something like that and you've got an economy that's as stagnant as it is, there isn't building going on, there's not remodeling going on, they don't have the revenues. So they've gone from, I believe, Bob, it was about 21 people?
21 or 22, and they're down to about 9
Down
now.
to 9 people. And those 9 are taking 1 day a week off,
Okay.
which is, that's pretty big. That's a 20% pay cut for those individuals.
Right.
Bob, what about public safety? What's going to happen with that next year? I know that's, we have to keep it going. Are we putting more money into that? Same?
Our budget process tries to emphasize those things at the county that are the highest priority to the community and as determined by the commissioners. So public safety did rank pretty high in our prioritization process. So we're trying to preserve that area. Particularly within public safety, there's quite a few different services. Detention, which is running the jail and alternative sentencing programs, patrol, prosecution, all those got the highest priority in their areas. We have, in the process of setting priorities, the commissioners had some departments and some activities that they held away from being reduced. Others got as much as a 6% reduction, but public safety is right up there as for being continued.
In fact, that was kind of where I was hoping you'd go too, is to tell us a little bit about where does the money go? How is it broken up and separated out, and how is that decided? Just on the big picture.
It's decided by a process of looking first at how much money we think we're going to have for the year. So we have to spend just what we receive, no more than that. So the very first step in the budget process is to determine, well, what do we have available that we can dedicate to these different major areas? The second step of the budget process is for the county commissioners to identify these major areas and allocate the total dollars among these areas. And they tried very hard to preserve the public safety area, also to some degree the health and well-being kind of areas. Once it's allocated to these major areas, then it's allocated within those areas to the various services. And it's based on a prioritization process using some measurable criteria to determine what are the highest priorities and which are the lowest out of those.
Okay, so the commissioners would take those areas and they would determine by a priority process how much they want to give each of those areas?
That's correct.
Okay.
A simple question to them is, in comparison to the previous year, do you want to put more or less after you've looked at the community, taken in information, looked at legislation, looked at the economy, taking all the different factors into consideration? How would you reallocate the dollars that we have among those categories? Some get a little more, some get a little less.
Okay. And Frank, has it always been done that way?
It hasn't. It hasn't. This is a big change. We're really moving towards a model called budgeting for outcomes and looking at goals and how do we come up with ways that meet what the citizens need out there. It's been done a lot of ways during the past. It's been a lot more maybe arbitrary. A lot of times it was just take whatever you did last year and add a certain amount on top of it, and that's what you did again, and assume everything you're doing is fine. But that doesn't take into account changes in the environment, changes in the community, changes in the demographics. This new system, I think, is a much better way to do it. We're looking at what does the community need, what does the community want, and how do we meet those needs? And then we're going to be measuring those needs to see what good of a job are we doing at meeting those needs that the citizens want. So it's I think, a much better way to go about budgeting. It makes a lot more sense, and it's a lot more accountable, I think, to the citizens than what's been done in the past.
So obviously the commissioners don't have a crystal ball that tells them, gives them all the answers to make those decisions. How they decide what the citizens want and need?
Well, we have a process that's developing, and we've been changing our budget for several years. But we start out very early in the year with what we call an environmental scan. And really, that's just to look at that is the crystal ball. Is pull out the crystal ball and see what's in the future for us, as cloudy as it can be. But we don't do it just as a guess. We have the departments come in, and in their areas of expertise, they tell us what's happening. Like the road department comes in and tells us what's the condition of our roads. Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? What do we expect as far as traffic volumes? What roads are getting used more than others? The sheriff and elected officials come in and say the same type of things and tell us what they see in the future. The commissioners also go out and meet with citizens groups and get input from citizens and ask for input. What do citizens see as the issues? What do they want to see more of? What do they want to see less of? We do a citizen survey every other year. We're going to be doing one this next year, where we take a random sample of the citizens and ask, on these programs, how are we doing? Is it important? And should we be doing more of it or less of it? So we get a feel from what the citizens are doing. And then we also have just some more boring facts and figures. What's the economy doing? What's the prediction on the growth rate and the CPI? And then the commissioners have to put all that into a big bucket, mix it around, and use that to make their predictions and decision on what their priorities are.
Okay. And that's a great time to take just a moment's break. We'll be right back, and we'll continue with That Larimer County Show.
Well, we're back, and during the first part of our session, we talked about how we spend our money, but where do we get our money? How do we raise the money that we're spending out there for providing those Larimer County services?
Well, Neil, about a third of our budget comes from property taxes. And our assessor every 2 years goes out and appraises the taxable value of all real estate in Larimer County. And this year, when that third of our budget was set by the county assessor by determining the value of all property, he was looking back 60 months, saw the increase in real estate values over the past most of those months, and determined that the total value of property in Larimer County increased by 3%. So our property taxes will increase by 3%. But in 2012, the assessor will reappraise all properties again, and by that time he'll be looking back at a housing slump. And at that time we'll probably see 4 to 5% reduction in property taxes. So there is a delay in a third of our budget on when it happens to the economy and when it works its way into our budget. The other 2/3 of the budget are from charges for services, and we also receive a lot of federal and state dollars. We're a conduit for spending of those dollars. If the state of Colorado wants to do something consistently across the whole state, many times those duties are charged to counties to do. So it's done the same way in every county across the state. So we do motor vehicle and elections and quite a few other services that are very common to other counties.
So when I say my property tax, 100% of that property tax goes to the county to do?
No, I'll give you an example. A $276,000 home will pay around $1,900 a year in property taxes. And only a quarter of that, about $470 to $480, goes to operate county government. The remainder goes to operate schools, cities, hospital districts, other kinds of fire districts, those kinds of things. So out of whatever you pay in property taxes, about a quarter of it stays with Larimer County to operate. And then that's divided among our different service areas: safety, well-being, health, those kinds of things.
So if you vote, that supports voting. If you drive on roads, county roads, that supports that. And all the services, restaurants, inspections, I mean the things that people do every day.
And there are many things that we do that people luckily don't have to think about every day. Air quality monitoring, water quality, taking care of people that are arrested and in jail. We operate the county jail. There's quite a few areas that are behind the scenes that kind of support the social fabric.
Somewhat invisible, but very important.
Yes, very.
So when we're talking about services and where the money comes from, and you mentioned state and federal dollars, a lot of people have heard about the stimulus funds that have been available to counties throughout the country and cities and entities. And Larimer County has received some stimulus dollars as well for various projects. How does that affect the budget?
Well, those stimulus dollars, we usually can't predict them a year ahead of time. So they come in terms of a revision to our current year budget. And we have at our website, www.larimer.org, we have a specific area there just for looking at stimulus funds, and we've received quite a bit. Most of it is in transportation, employment and well-being type programs, as well as energy conservation. And you can see that we've received well over $4 million for quite a few projects. Transportation projects will be the biggest, and they will be revisions to the existing budget to receive the extra dollars and spend it on whatever it is that the federal government set the money up for.
So Frank, how is our money situation compared to other counties in the state?
I think we're in pretty good shape. And funding-wise, we're about in the middle of everything. Our mill levy is about in the middle compared to the other large counties. When you look at the other 10 large counties, in fact, we're exactly in the middle with how high our mill levy is. I think we're in better shape because we are, as I said earlier, we've been pretty conservative with our budgeting. We're setting money aside. We've always set money aside for replacing equipment, for taking care of some of our buildings. I think one of the things we've tried really hard about our budget over the years is it's sustainable. If we get new money in, we need to make sure it's something that we don't start a program we can't sustain into the future. And that has been a mantra that we've had over and over again with the staff. It's tempting sometimes if you get new revenue to start some new exciting program. But we've got to make sure it's sustainable. And our budget is always built around that with some key fundamental values. And because of that, I think we're in better shape. A lot of the counties around the state are dipping heavily into their reserves. And, you know, it's just like your home budget. You can't dip into savings. You can do it a little bit if there's a rainy day. But I've said this before, this isn't a rainy day, this is climate change. And if you try and use your rainy day money year after year after year, you finally want to run out of the money. So we're in much better shape than many counties in that position. Some counties are dependent on oil and gas monies from severance funds. Those are way down, they're hurting right now. Some are more of a boom and bust in their economy. But our economy is pretty balanced here, and there's not one segment that dominates. Northern Colorado, and even across the country, Colorado is doing better. Colorado has been identified as one of the places that's going to lead the country out of a recession. And Northern Colorado is one of the strongest portions of Colorado. So in some ways, we're very lucky to be where we've been, and I think because of our past history and past philosophies, we're much stronger to weather the storm than a lot of places in the country are.
And to reiterate then, you said earlier with what you expect to happen in 2011, 2012 with a lower revenue base available, then those reserves would be available.
That's why we want to have reserves, so we can use them for those purposes and carry through that. As Bob said, we think that property values will probably drop because this last assessment was before the recession. And sometimes people wonder because their property values went down, but not when they got their tax assessment. And that's because the assessment was done prior to the recession. Now the property values have gone down. We'll see that in the next few years. And it will take a while to build that back up. And that will affect how we do expenditures. I think on a national level, we'll see less and less of the federal funds and support from other entities. And as Bob said, we're real dependent on those other revenues for many of our programs. Some of our programs are as much as 80 to 90% dependent on federal or state funds. And as those get cut, those programs will get hit much harder.
And that's where the prioritization probably comes into play as we go on into the future years. You see that being more important and perhaps even doing more of certain things and less of others?
Exactly. And that's what will allow us to stay on top of the budget and not allow it to get out of hand. The process of doing the environmental scan and looking around and making a decision, conscious decision of what do we see, what do we need to do, combined with knowing exactly how much money we think we're going to have, and we can estimate that relatively accurately. Then the prioritization process makes sure that we're putting the monies towards the high priority programs, and unfortunately for some, we have to decrease the funding for the lowest priority services. We'll always match our budget and our expenditures to the monies that we have. That'll keep us in balance. The nice thing about this is that I've seen in the last few weeks some newspaper articles about communities that are just now trying to make a decision of how to cut 20 or 30 or 10 or whatever millions of dollars out of their budget. And you don't want to wait till the last minute to do that. You've got to have a plan. And our plan is to first take all of our services and prioritize them so we know what's most important and what's the least, and then we apply the dollars accordingly.
You know, one of the things that's different, people look at cities, like City of Fort Collins, City of Loveland, that are very much funded on sales tax. And that's much more volatile. So that goes up and down, and that's an advantage at times when things are going up. It's a disadvantage when things are going down. But you can't take that over to the county because although we have sales tax, those are for some very specific projects and earmarked. Most of our money comes from federal funding, state funding, and property tax. And property tax doesn't have that volatility. So it only happens every couple of years it goes up and goes down, which evens things out for us. But if it goes down, it stays down until there's a new property assessment 2 years later. So it's a little bit different model than some of the other governments have to operate on in the area.
And that reminds me of a question that I heard a few people ask. When sales tax does go up, and we have this abundance of money in open lands, which is a county sales tax, why don't we take that open lands sales tax and use it for some of the other important things?
You know, that's come up before, but all of our sales tax are from voter initiatives, and by law they're earmarked for a certain purpose. And it would be illegal for us. We'd be violating the trust from the citizens who put that on the ballot to take money that they voted on for open lands and move it to something else. So even if the open lands tax or one of the other sales taxes for the ranch becomes flush because of an increase in sales tax, we cannot divert that for some other use. That would be illegal.
You said earlier, a comment you made is that the most important services and the least important services. Mm-hmm. How would you describe in a few words, a thought, how would you describe the most important services? Like, what makes a service the most important or the least important?
Well, we use a common criteria for all of our services when we try to make that determination. And we use some point scale for determining each service, how does it compare to others. And we use a couple common criteria. One of them is this service, what's the requirement or need to provide this service? Those things that are mandated by law, those become very important, that we have to do. We're required by law to register motor vehicles, conduct elections, have a coroner's office, keep and manage the county jail. So those get high marks for that. We also ask some other questions about how much does it contribute towards basic health, safety, and welfare of the community? Does it embody our values of collaboration and prevention? So we use those kinds of criteria to then shake down all of our different services and rank them from highest to lowest.
So it's not just what what we have to do as a county, but also what is important to the communities as a whole.
Most certainly.
And citizens. And
included in the priority is what citizens feel, as well as our county commissioners, and what citizens feel come from that public survey that we do every 2 years.
Okay. We've got just a few minutes left, so how do you involve the public in this process? Okay, October 15th was when the budget was published by law, and you always have the balanced budget out there at that time. And then you have a process for involving the public in it before the commissioners vote to adopt it or not. So what is that process?
Well, at this point, the budget that's on the table is the county manager's recommended budget. And that's all it is a recommendation. It's been turned over to the Board of County Commissioners, and now they take it out, they take comments in a number of ways. We're going to have some public hearings coming up in the future. They still have their public meetings where they have their community breakfasts all over Larimer County. Each commissioner does and take input there. Email, the budgets are available at the libraries, they're available online. And it's any way that people want to give input to the commissioners about whether they think something should be changed in the budget or what do they think about the budget. Commissioners are looking for that information. And they'll take all that information, and probably in the end of November, we'll regroup with them and take a look at, do they want any changes? Do they have things they want us to do and adjust? Bob and I will sit down, make those adjustments before the adopted budget. We also would like input throughout the year, not just during the budget cycle. So before we go into the environmental scan next year, anytime somebody has comments about how we should be spending the money or what kind of services we should be offering or not offering, or why, questions about why do we do something, we love to hear from people and get those kind of comments from citizens any time of the year.
So do you want to plug how important public information is?
Yeah, absolutely. It is important, and you get questions from citizens on a regular basis.
Oh, yes. On our website, we have a direct connection. When you're viewing the budget of the county, of Larimer County, there's a place where you can just click and immediately send an email to a county commissioner about comments about the budget, where money's going, what you think about it, that kind of thing. It goes to myself as well as the commissioners. And so
Do you find yourself explaining budget concepts to citizens?
most certainly, and county government is usually the most complicated just because it has such a strange mixture of funding for a lot of our services.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here for that Larimer County show. Any final thoughts, Neil?
Nope, it was very interesting. I hope the viewers found it very informative as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yes,
Thank you.
thanks to Larimer County Manager Frank Lancaster and Larimer County Budget Director Bob Keister, Neil Gluckman and myself, and thanks for joining us for that Larimer County show.